From the training camps to the battlegrounds of a devastating war, Stanley Kubrick's FullMetalJacket explores the terrifying process of the Vietnam War, which starts off with boys being disciplined by a ruthless and sadistic sergeant, where in the second half we follow soldiers fighting in the war, where they have now been programmed into killers. Released in 1987, in FullMetalJacket we follow the character Private Joker, played by Matthew Modine, where we see the war through his perspective. From the mental collapse of fellow war recruit Private Pyle, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, to Joker serving as a war correspondent journalist, to the Battle of Hue, FullMetalJacket is not only considered one of Kubrick's greatest movies, but also a confronting and haunting look at this disturbing chapter in our history. So it's time to show our war faces as we respectfully explore 10 things that you didn't know about FullMetalJacket. So let's not waste any time, or maybe waste a little bit of time. Either way, it's going to be very insightful and knowledgeable. So yeah, let's check it out. Number 10, based on a book. FullMetalJacket is based on the 1979 book The Short-Timers by Gustav Hasford. The book itself is semi-autobiographical, as it explores Hasford's time he served in the Vietnam War, where he served as a journalist, writing articles for popular magazines Pacific Stars and Stripes and Leatherneck magazine. Although the soldier that we follow in the book isn't Hasford, but a fictional character called James T. Davis, aka Joker, just like what we see in FullMetalJacket. There are lots of other events that take place in the book that also feature in the movie, such as the brutal drill sergeant and Private Pyle. But there are also some things that didn't make it into the movie, such as rats getting slaughtered and themes of cannibalism. When the book came out, it was considered a terrifying real piece of war literature, and author Gustav Hasford wrote a follow-up in 1990 called The Phantom Blooper, a novel of Vietnam. And he was to write a third entry, but sadly he passed away in 1993. And what is equally sad is if his stories are anything to go by, he never fully escaped the horrors of war. Number 9. Kubrick originally wanted to make a movie about World War II. It was 1980, the same year that Stanley Kubrick's The Shining came out, which, although would become a cinematic classic, upon arrival, it was met with a very lukewarm response. Kubrick decided that for his next film project, he wanted to make a movie about the horrific Holocaust, and thus an exploration into the evils of World War II. Kubrick contacted author Michael Herr after reading his book Dispatches, which is described as being one of the first books to fully explore the experiences of the Vietnam War. Herr himself also served as a journalist during the Vietnam War. Herr and Kubrick met in England, where Kubrick expressed that he wanted to make a war film, but he just didn't have a story yet. So eventually, Kubrick changed gears from making a movie about the Holocaust to making one about the war in Vietnam. It would also make sense for Kubrick to want to work with her, as Herr also helped with the creative process for Apocalypse Now, in order to make that movie feel more authentic. However, Herr was hesitant to work on this new project with Kubrick, and he took a little convincing. Well, 3 years of convincing to be precise, until he finally agreed to work on the movie with Kubrick. Number 8. Stressful script writing process. Kubrick and Herr had decided to make Gustav Hasford's novel The Short-Timers the basis for the story for the war film that they were working on. So, who else better to get than the author of the novel when you're writing a movie about said novel? So Kubrick invited Hasford to join him and Michael Herr to write a movie script for The Short-Timers, and he agreed. And so Kubrick, Herr and Hasford were all working on the script. Although, according to the yardbaker.com, it was a very confusing script to work on, as while working on the script, all three men weren't actually working together. Kubrick would call both her and Hasford and tell them what he wanted, and then they would go off and do some writing and then send him their work, to which Kubrick would then splice the material together, which caused conflict over credit for the finalised script, and Hasford even considered legal action. But incidentally, the writing credits for FullMetalJacket are attributed to Kubrick, her, and Hasford. But that didn't stop confusion among the writers as to who actually wrote what. To get some perspective over the lack of communication involved in writing the script, Kubrick and Hasford only met one time, and they apparently really didn't get along and never met again. But there are claims that Hasford and two friends snuck onto the set of FullMetalJacket disguised as extras. Number 7. Origin of the title. So it's here we get to the movie's infamous title, FullMetalJacket. Kubrick deviated from the source material's original title of The Short Timers, because, oddly enough, Kubrick thought that it would send the wrong message about the movie. He felt that with a title like that, people would automatically assume that The Short Timers was a movie about people who only did part-time work, or half a day's work. So he decided that the title had to be changed. So, how did he come up with the title of FullMetalJacket? Well, he was reading a gun catalogue, where in the catalogue, he saw the term FullMetalJacket, which described the casing of a bullet. And so Kubrick decided to use that descriptive term, which he saw from a catalogue, mind you, as the title for his war movie. And yes, FullMetalJacket is a snappy, punchy title and really gets your attention. Number 6. Casting possibilities. So when it came to the casting of the characters seen in FullMetalJacket, many well-known actors were considered. When it came to the movie's main lead and narrator, Joker, the actor who was originally the favourite to take on the part was 1980s Brat Pack member Anthony Michael Hall. Now he was cast and was part of the production until he left after 8 months of negotiations over a supposed pay compensation dispute. Next in line for the part was Val Kilmer, but that also didn't work out and he wasn't cast. Now it was supposedly Val Kilmer who got eventual Joker Matthew Modine the part, and the story goes that Kilmer met Modine at a restaurant, where Kilmer was annoyed at Modine for getting the role, as he was the one who wanted the part and thus to star in Kubrick's next film. Now, Modine actually didn't know anything about this and called up his agent to see if his agent knew anything about him being cast in this Stanley Kubrick movie and being chosen over Val Kilmer. And once being informed, even his agent had no idea what the heck was going on or what Val Kilmer was going on about, where they both confusingly called FullMetalJacket's production at Warner Brothers, which eventually led to clips from Modine's previous movies, Birdie and Vision Quest being sent to Kubrick, which eventually got Modine the part, and Modine feels that the unfortunate run-in that he had with Val Kilmer may have actually led to his eventual casting. According to Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was offered the part of Animal Mother, but he had to turn it down as he was way too busy, so the part went to Adam Baldwin. Bruce Willis was offered a part in FullMetalJacket, but he also had to turn it down as he was about to start filming his sitcom Moonlighting. And Denzel Washington was supposedly offered a part, but he was put off by the fact that Kubrick didn't send him an audition script. And Ed Harris was offered the role of Sergeant Hartman, but turned it down. Number 5. Vincent D'Onofrio's Woes. To me, the standout performance in FullMetalJacket is Private Pyle. I can't help but feel sorry for this guy and his eventual decline into madness, making him a truly tragic character, almost Shakespearean. At the start of the movie in the boot camp scenes, you can really feel his spirit being beaten and broken, to the point where he murders Gunnery, before killing himself in a state of insanity. And every time I watch FullMetalJacket, it's always the scenes with Pyle that stand out in my mind and affect me the most. According to Kubrick, Pyle was the hardest character to cast, but he was instantly sold on Vincent D'Onofrio's audition tape. Now, D'Onofrio was required to put on weight for the part, and I can remember reading an interview with him many years ago, and he said something to the effect of that he turned up on set with his initial weight gain, only he looked really buff and like he could have kicked everyone's ass. But he was then told to go back and put on more weight, where he ended up gaining a whopping 70 pounds, finally capturing the look that Kubrick wanted. The weight gain and the fact that he had to shave his head actually really affected D'Onofrio, claiming that it changed his life and that women wouldn't look at him and that people had to say things twice to him because they thought he actually was, quote, stupid. But I think that's probably more of a reflection on his brilliant acting. But yeah, during the filming, D'Onofrio really wasn't happy and was suffering inside. A bit like the actual character of Private Pyle when you think about it. And to make matters worse, while filming, D'Onofrio tore ligaments in his knee from all the weight that he had put on. Wow, the guy sure did suffer for his art. It seems that playing Private Pyle was both emotionally and physically painful. Number 4. The drill instructor we got wasn't meant to be in the film. Another standout performance is that of the brutal but memorable Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, played by real-life former Marine Drill Sergeant R. Lee Ermey. Now, the first couple of minutes of FullMetalJacket is literally this guy screaming out insults, but it creates a provocative and interestingly captivating environment to watch as an observer, while feeling safe in relief that it's not you suffering the wrath of this guy's harsh treatment. However, Ermey wasn't originally meant to play the part. The role had been cast with an actor called Tim Colcherry. However, Ermey was on set acting as a technical consultant, as the cast had to go through a real boot camp style of training. But he wanted the role of Gunnery so much, during rehearsals he would hurl insults at the cast just like the drill instructor character. And Kubrick was impressed with what he saw when observing behind the scenes footage of Ermey's tirades. So, just like that, he cast him in the role. But to make sure that Ermey was up to the task of acting, Kubrick and his assistant would throw oranges and balls at Ermey during his rehearsals, to make sure that he didn't screw up his lines, which he didn't. Yeah, Kubrick had some, well, interesting techniques. And to help with the role, Ermey himself came up with 150 insults to use in the film. However, during the filming of FullMetalJacket, Ermey was involved in a car crash, where he broke several ribs and required several months to heal, but thankfully he was okay. And as for the guy who was originally cast as Gunnery, Tim Colcherry, well, he did end up starring in FullMetalJacket as Door Gunner, who gave us the infamous line, "Get some." Number 3. Filming location. Now, despite the fact that the movie starts off at a US training facility called Paris Island and ends up in a war-torn Vietnam, none of the movie was actually shot on any of these locations. Now, originally I couldn't believe this, but the entire movie was filmed in England. Yeah, even the scenes that were supposedly Vietnam were shot in rainy old England, which is just insane. Going back to the yardbaker.com, several props were flown into the set to try and recreate Vietnam, including bringing in 200 Spanish palm trees and 100,000 tropical plastic plants from Hong Kong. Most of the war-torn Vietnam scenes were shot at an abandoned gasworks plant in London called Beckton Gasworks, and the filming was toxic. And no, when I say toxic, I don't mean the modern use of the word, as in the cast and crew didn't like the latest Star Wars or Marvel TV shows. Seriously, what is all that about? But the filming was literally toxic, thanks to all the chemical fumes still lingering in the air. Matthew Modine would say that filming at the location was difficult due to the toxic environment created by hundreds of chemicals that had contaminated the place, which also included asbestos. And also, let's not forget about Stanley Kubrick's reputation of filming multiple takes, like, as in a lot of takes, something that would often be both physically and emotionally draining on his cast. Well, it seems it was no different for FullMetalJacket. Despite taking place in the second half of the movie, the Vietnam scenes were actually shot first, and then the training camp scenes were shot second, probably due to the fact that the actors had to shave their heads for the boot camp scenes. The scenes were shot at a Royal Air Fire Station and at a British Army base. Even Stanley Kubrick's daughter Vivian helped with the behind the scenes, as she scored the music for FullMetalJacket, but for some reason went under the pseudonym of Abigail Mead. Yeah, I don't get it. Number 2. Matthew Modine had to fight to get time off to be there for the birth of his child. So the shoot for FullMetalJacket is described as being a long and drawn out one, with filming lasting from 1985 to 1986. In fact, it's famously stated that in the time it took to film FullMetalJacket, actor Matthew Modine got married, conceived a child, had the birth of that child, and then had the child's first birthday. Yeah, all within the time it took to shoot the movie. However, there is one story floating around out there that Modine had to take drastic actions in order to be there for the birth of his child. Now, Modine's wife was in hospital having a C-section, and naturally he wanted to be there for the birth. So he asked Kubrick if he could have the day off. After all, he wasn't scheduled to shoot any scenes that day. But Kubrick didn't want him to leave the set, probably in case last-minute unscheduled filming with Modine was required. But Modine was so desperate to be there for his wife and child that he threatened to cut his own hand, and thus he would have to go to the hospital anyway. Kubrick finally allowed Modine to leave the set, but told him that he must come back as soon as possible. So Kubrick kind of being a dick to his cast? Now where have I heard that before? I just want to add that I still think that Kubrick was a brilliant director who made masterpieces. Modine would actually get all of his diary notes that he made while filming FullMetalJacket and publish them as a book in 2005 called FullMetalJacket Diary. The book has exceptional reviews, with people saying that it's a great insight into Stanley Kubrick and his unique way of functioning and the filmmaking process in general. Number 1. Full Metal release. FullMetalJacket was released in June 1987 in the States and in September of that year in the UK. FullMetalJacket was financially successful, making $120 million on a budget that sat somewhere between 16 to 30 million. It also got fairly positive reviews from critics, with most of the praise going to Lee Ermey as Sergeant Hartman. Although the movie wasn't without its criticisms, especially the second half. Whereas the first half got lots of praise, some felt that the actual war scenes that preceded it felt sloppy, with the movie's true message getting lost and muddled. But this hasn't stopped FullMetalJacket to go on to be considered as a classic, and one of the greatest war movies ever made, and one of the greatest movies ever made in general. It definitely lives up to Kubrick's high quality standard that fans have really come to appreciate and adore. FullMetalJacket is often bundled together with other war movies that came out round about that time, which were in particular exploring the horrors and traumas of the Vietnam War. So here's what I think of FullMetalJacket. Now, there does seem to be a common opinion that FullMetalJacket is kind of like two movies in one. There's the camp training first half, and then actually seeing soldiers in action in the field in the second half, creating two different stories with two different backdrops. But to me, FullMetalJacket is one long conclusive story, which takes us on a journey down this period of time when we see boys going through their training process till the later part of the movie where they have now been moulded into killers. It's actually really tragic. FullMetalJacket is without a doubt a sad tale. It's the ultimate exploration into a process that moulds the innocents into killing machines, ones whom were sent out into battle in a horrific war. That's why movies like FullMetalJacket are important, so we will never forget the conflicts and traumas of our past, in order for us to move forward into the future. FullMetalJacket is a powerful movie. It's not some light bit of viewing entertainment. You have to invest in order to watch it, and it can at times be quite draining due to its subject matter. But as soon as you've reached the end and bared witness to the story that Stanley Kubrick wanted to show you, you're actually quite glad that you stuck it through and got there. Anyway, I'm Minty, and never forget that one time that Stanley Kubrick was able to recreate the Vietnam War in 1980s London. Wow. See ya!